In, out. In, out. In, out. Right now, you're just revving your engine, all right? These first few minutes is going to set the tone for the entire session. In, out. Investing in yourself and your spiritual growth. Stay on track. You've conquered tougher challenges. All a reflection of your inner world. Remember, the universe always prioritizes our growth over our comfort. Deep breath in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Dig that in and hold it. Squeeze everything in your body. Exhale with a big ass scream.
It feels like an emotional orgasm.
I think you got a friend here.
Won't you join me?
Yes, join Audrey Hepburn as you've never seen her before, kicking over the traces and bringing to life Truman Capote's Breakfast at Tiffany's. You have a special invitation to attend Audrey Hepburn's open house on the wildest night New York ever knew.
Suddenly, this man got up, and he came over to the table where I was sitting, and he had the felt pen in his hand. And he stood in front of me. Now, you just keep quiet.
Okay.
And he stood in front of me, and he unbuckled his buckle, and he dropped his trousers, and he handed me the felt pen. And he said, since you're on an autographing spree, would you mind autographing this? And so I said, well, listen, maybe I can't autograph it, but perhaps I could initial it.
Will you welcome, please, Mr. Truman Capote?
People knew him not only as a successful writer, but as that funny little man who appeared on all the television talk shows.
What is the nearest thing in physical sensation to an orgasm? And I came up with the idea that it was sneezing.
But did I read somewhere that you said all actors are stupid?
You're overstating it.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
I said most actors are
Most actors.
Hello, welcome back to a fresh episode of Doing It with Mike Sachs. Spring is in the air, isn't it? Or is that the free cologne I splashed on my cheeks last night from that bathroom at the strip club near the airport? No, it is not. It's spring. Anyway, we have two great interviews this episode for you. Two wonderful writers with fresh books out for you to enjoy. So let's get right to it because you're doing it with me, and that would be Mike Sachs. In my first interview, I talked with a writer I'm very fond of, Adelle Waldman. About 20 years ago, Adelle wrote a great book called The Love Affairs of Nathaniel P. And it was super, super accurate about describing a type of Brooklyn guy that we all knew and were familiar with, and the lit world in Brooklyn and New York that surrounded him and us. Rereading it again, it struck me just how innocent it was in some ways. Yes, we're 20 years older, of course. The satirical elements were still spot on, I found, but the themes and issues that Adelle deals with in her latest book, Help Wanted, just out from W.W. Norton, to me are darker and richer and sadder, more adult, and tethered directly into this very bizarre world we are now living in. Adelle has spoken about not having written a book since 2013, was quite honest about it, saying, to my surprise, I just didn't have another idea. To get the juices flowing, and perhaps just for life experience, which I actually recommend for any writer, she chose to work at an overnight, very early morning shift at what I'm assuming was a Target in the Hudson Valley of New York. In the book, the store is called Town Square. It's a fascinating book about a subject that really interests me for personal reasons. I myself worked retail for 10 years back in Virginia and New Orleans and Maryland, and in many ways, it's almost like living in an alternate reality working retail. You're ignored by those who come into the store, generally unless they're frustrated or mad at you for preventing them from getting something they feel they deserve, and they always feel they deserve it right then and there. You're living behind the scenes in a sense. You're often surrounded by customers making a lot more money than you. Now, I worked retail from 15 to 25, and in retrospect, I did have some good times doing that, but it was for very little money, and it was open-ended, meaning I didn't know when it was going to end. I truly felt that I could have been working retail for the rest of my life. It felt at that time almost like a prison sentence with no end in sight. While I was doing this, working retail, most of my friends were achieving some sort of success, whether it was going to college or grad school or working for the family business or what have you, or traveling, whatever it might have been. And I was stuck behind a government housing project in Aspen Hill, Maryland, selling CDs to the Bodyguard soundtrack. But I think this is a world that deserves to be known. And I say this in this upcoming interview, but I truly believe that there should be, for any young American, a mandatory requirement to work this type of job, to know what it's like to press a button on Amazon and then just expect your product to magically arrive by box the next day, but to know what goes on to make that happen. You're not just pressing a button. You're setting in motion a long link of events that have to occur in order for you to get that book the next day. Now, President Kennedy started the Peace Corps, and it sounds like a joke, but I'm not joking when I say this. I think there should be a service where one learns what goes on behind the scenes in a world that's convenient for many, but brutally difficult for those who help make all of these conveniences happen day after day. I wouldn't have traded all those years in retail for anything, really, because I do feel that they helped me become a better writer and possibly person than if I had not done them. But it does feel like I sort of paid the price in some ways. I did miss out on other things I could have been experiencing. Now, I worked these jobs, as I said, from a teenager to early to mid-20-something. But what Adelle does in the book and what she deals with are the middle-aged and even the senior citizens who work these very physically demanding jobs, oftentimes without a car, forced to walk in the middle of the night alongside a busy road to get to work. They generally have no health insurance. They have hours that make it practically impossible to be there for your child, if you have one, to be there for your family, to have any personal time. It's grueling, and the margin of error between making enough to eat and having a place to stay and having nothing and being on the streets is very, very small. One decision, one event, one anything can throw you overboard. Now, to write about this world is really tough, especially if coming at it from, I suppose, a literary viewpoint. It's very easy to slip into caricature and cliche and to write about this world as one would a science fiction novel about a life and a community happening on another planet. But Adelle really pulls it off beautifully, inhabiting many characters, up to 10, of all ages and backgrounds, and bringing them all together in a very accurate depiction of what's happening out there today. And it's not pretty. But rather than making this a literary stunt, which she very easily could have done, Adelle has admitted numerous times in interviews that she was not doing this because she needed the money. She knew she wasn't going to do this forever, but she wanted to slip into that world. And I think it was a very interesting, smart move on her part, because it could have really been a stunt, but she nails it. And I highly recommend this book. Even beyond that, she is from Maryland, so God love her for that, and she's an Orioles fan. Here is my interview with Adelle Waldman on her new book, Help Wanted. So I love the honesty that you've been giving as to why you hadn't put out a new book in 10 years. Usually authors will sort of fudge around this issue, but you came right out and, to my surprise, I just didn't have another idea. What was it about this that sort of propelled you into putting your nose to the grindstone, knowing how much work goes into writing a novel?
What it was is I had a to-do list with various writing ideas that I thought I would try out before I just gave up entirely and was like, well, I can't call myself a novelist anymore if I'm not actually writing fiction. And I think one of the things on the list was a book of essays about 19th century novels, which I love, but I just tried that, wasn't going anywhere. It just didn't feel like the time was right for it. So I got to the bottom of the list. The only thing left was get a kind of low-wage job and see what happens. And I have to say, I mean, one thing I should clarify is it's not like I had never had a low-wage job before. I had, but when I was younger, I was a waitress, I was a bagger at a grocery store. I worked at a Starbucks. So I don't want to make it sound like this is the first time I'd ever done anything like it, but it was different when I was younger. I was sort of doing jobs just for money. It was what I considered the least interesting part of my life. And the main part of my life was hanging out with my friends or school or whatever. Whereas I went into this job with just a different attitude. I was just interested in it and the people. And so I have to say, just very, very quickly, I found it electrifying. I found the store itself and the people I worked with to be really surprisingly like a rich environment for fiction. It was to like our group, the group of people I was working with in the middle of the night, we were unpacking boxes. They were very funny in general, and just to be in a big box store in the middle of the night, the lights on dim, the store's closed to customers, you're just unpacking random consumer goods, the group of people, different ages, races, genders, ethnicities, and kind of just like cracking jokes. I just found it really compelling and fun. And at the same time, I also found the financial conditions under which we worked, and particularly my coworkers who were unlike me, not just doing it for a few months, the conditions they were subject to were just unconscionable. So these two things combine, the idea of like this is rich and fun, and it's not all like doom and gloom the way I think, I know some people's mind goes to when you talk about sort of low-wage workers, combined with the fact that it was actually unconscionable. And I think that workers are being like horrifically exploited. I don't know. So those two things just very quickly were like, this is it. I don't know how I'm going to do it. It's going to be hard, but I really, really want to spend as much time as it takes trying to find a way to write about this.
Yeah, it's interesting. It could have been, I think, stunt-like or exploitative, but it's really anything but. But was there a fear of it being exploitative?
Yes, definitely. I mean, and there still is. I feel like it's such a tricky balance that I think I knew when I took the job that there was something a little like eye-rolly about it, like just middle class white women gets a low-wage job, and it's I don't know what to do with that, because I guess I felt like if I weren't in my own sense of things backed into a corner where I'd kind of tried everything, I needed an idea for a novel, or I needed to pack it up and become an English teacher. High school English teacher was my backup plan. I don't think I would have done it, but I sort of did it in spite of the fact of like, well, this is a little bit cringy and there's just no getting around it. And then how I can justify it to myself, because I have a background as a business reporter, newspaper reporter, and I felt like there was something in part that I thought I could bring to it of just trying to analyze the system, the larger system. I mean, that was, I don't know, part of some justification, but in terms of the people, it's just really tricky, because I certainly felt like in writing the novel, my first novel is about a writer in Brooklyn and his love life, and he's this sort of Harvard educated intellectual, very self-confident. I feel like that book, it was so easy to kind of poke fun at my main character the whole time, to sort of be alternately sympathetic toward him and sort of ironic about his lack of self-awareness and more obnoxious qualities. I definitely feel like that tone did not feel right for this novel. The irony I wanted to direct in the novel was all toward the corporation the larger system, and maybe toward the sort of upper middle class Americans who kind of who justify all this, who kind of like walk through it without really, I don't know, having sort of a comforting set of beliefs that people who work hard can get ahead, and that's how we who are more comfortable sort of justify our relative status based on our hard work. So I felt like it was definitely important for me to direct the irony elsewhere. I wanted to treat the workers as the main characters are workers, not with kid gloves, as like people who are less than human. I want them to be really funny and flawed and normal, and just to be like anyone else, like any other characters in a novel, like not just to be objects of sociological pity because they're poor. But at the same time, I just had no stomach for making them objects of mockery. Like I just, for me, the purpose of this novel, all the mockery is directed at the system that makes their lives so much harder than they should be.
What you just said, I found very interesting, because it almost is like the reporter in the early 20th century who went into the mental institution and depicted what was going on there, that it took someone with the technical know-how, with the tool set of a reporter and a writer to bring forth this world and to make it alive for the reader. And the fact that you had that background was advantageous, more so than someone who was working retail who has never written.
Right. But it's such a complicated thing, because I definitely feel very sensitive to the idea of not wanting to think that I am more capable of telling other people's stories than they are themselves. It's I don't 100% know what to do with that feeling. I felt like there's something I could bring to telling this story, and I tried to do it as best as I could. So I believe in it, but I also feel a slight queasiness of, I certainly don't want to pretend that I am capable of being the voice of working class America. Because I don't think any one person could be the voice. But B, is it nor? I'm from a middle class background. I did a job for a few months. It is complicated, because I feel like it's also important for people who aren't already established novelists to be able to tell their stories, and I don't know, I don't mean to sound like I'm on the fence about my own project. I just do feel, I understand why it can seem kind of eye rolly on its face.
Yeah, I can too. But that you had do you think the journalistic background, and do you think specifically your knowledge of institutional investing, and that's another similarity we have. I used to work at a place in DC called the Investor Responsibility Research Center, and we handled information pertaining to large institutional shareholders. And, going through these proxy reports, you really do get a sense of the high and the low of these industries, where the CEOs are making a ton of money and the workers are really not making much. Do you think that experience that you had with business and journalism helped to write this, pull off this fictional book?
I definitely think so. To me, in some ways, I see the heart of the book is there's a scene where Big Will, who's the manager of the store, he's trying to decide which of two workers should get a promotion in a certain circumstance. And he can't decide, because he can make a compelling case that each of them would be good at the job of being group manager. They'd get a low level management job, and each of them was capable, and then each would be angry if the other got it and not them. And he's just thinking about what to do. And he's thinking about how what he learned in economics classes in college just isn't helpful, that he was told that in an efficient firm, workers would be paid what they were worth to the firm, and that you would be able to reward workers by promoting them, by giving them raises in order to retain them. But that, and he wonders, he's like, well, maybe this was only ever relevant to white collar workers, not blue collar workers, but it's certainly not true of contemporary retail. And to me, in some ways, that is the heart of the book analytically. I mean, I don't think it's the heart of the book in terms of the plot and the characters, and I don't want to underplay that stuff, but that I think we have this idea about how business works and how the American economy works. But I think the reality on the ground for many people today is a lot more like the Gilded Age than it is the sort of post-New Deal America with much stronger unions and a government more interested in labor protections and just an ethos that like part of running a business or a corporation was that you paid your employees a reasonable living wage. And I think that was sort of the ethos of American business for a 30-year period for a variety of reasons. So yes, I guess I do see for me, the business background, because like you, I worked at a place called Institutional Investor in New York City. I worked for a newsletter where I wrote about online finance, and God, that was like 99, 2000, before moving to various newspapers as a business reporter. So I felt like that experience was extremely useful and sort of complements the aspects of the novel that just pure novel, that just characters out and about, hopefully being kind of funny and surprising.
Yeah, no, it was interesting comparing your first book with this one. The difference with the character, specifically with, you just mentioned Big Will, who I love this character because you didn't make him out to be a big goofball. You know, he was frat-like and he had his elements, but he was a decent guy, which I don't know if I've seen in the majority of fictional depictions of big retail, whether it's Office Space or, what have you. It's usually done in a demeaning way. In this case, there was a respect for this guy, and he showed respect to his employees, but even more importantly, you showed respect to him, even though he was the boss.
Right. I mean, and to me, this also goes back to the business background or the larger aims. I think in that, I'm really glad you picked up on that, because that was important to me. I kind of wanted the bad guy in this book to be the system, to have it not be about a personality, because I think that's a cop-out and it lets the rest of us off the hook, or it lets us take our gaze off the larger system. Because, the truth is they're good managers and they're bad managers, but in the system in which they operate, they have very limited power. And it's sort of not about whether someone is nice or not nice. And the way the book is constructed, there's also a bad manager named Meredith who gets on the sort of protagonists, the group of workers, or the protagonist's nerves, because she's a micromanager. She's kind of erratic. Sometimes she's overly friendly with them. Other times she's just obnoxious and yells at them and threatens to write them up. So it's not that I wanted to portray all managers as really decent people, but I felt like my larger agenda was this really isn't about a particular personality. The way I saw the book is that the character of Meredith, the bad manager, is like a red herring. She's sort of the focus of the character's ire in the beginning of the book. And I think, I imagine, or I wanted the reader to also feel focused on, like, yeah, they've got to get rid of Meredith. But that by the end of the book, it sort of seems like Meredith isn't their real problem. In some ways, she was just a distraction from their real problems. It was fun to have an enemy. So to that larger end, I felt like it was important to me to create good managers and bad managers.
Technically, you didn't make things easier for yourself. It's a very impressive book, technically. I mean, there are nearly 10 characters, not a single main protagonist. It's not a straightforward novel. So to pull that off, I mean, you set yourself up for a more difficult task.
Right. And I felt like I didn't quite do it on purpose. I just felt like I didn't have a choice because of what I was interested in that when I tried to imagine doing it with like a single protagonist, I was just like, this isn't, it's just becoming a different book. It felt like I was stuck with something difficult. And honestly, I often, regretted it or resented it. It was like, why have I done this to myself? But I felt like it was the only way to do what I wanted to do. It wasn't like I was like, I just want to take on something difficult. That'll be fun. It's more like I just got backed into a corner. I was like, I guess this is the only way out is
Right. Yeah. Sometimes the only way out is not the easy way out.
right.
You mentioned the needs and the wants from these characters, and it's such a striking difference between these characters in your first book, where the sense of entitlement for them was stronger in the first book. Their ambitions were different. In this book, the ambitions were just to get to work every day. And in one case, and this really hit home for me, there was never a mocking tone about what these characters wanted. There was one character who desperately wanted to be able to afford to take his son to Chuck E. Cheese for his birthday. And that really brought me back to my retail days, because the wants and of these workers, you can look at it from the outside as being mocking or minimal, but in their world, this is something very important. And you never took the tone, which I love, of making fun of what some might consider to be small dreams.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine a person who would take that tone. It seems so inappropriate to me, but and maybe part of it is when I spent time working at the store and thinking about the book, I had a young daughter. She's now 7.5, but she was about 1.5 years when I started. And I just saw in myself how much I wanted to make her life as pleasant and cheerful and easy. And that often involves spending money and buying her things, whether it's just candy, toys, treats, birthday parties. And it just really brought home to me. So many of my coworkers, they felt exactly the same way about their own children, of course, but just how much more easily I was able to, impulse buy some toys she wanted when we were walking through a store. And I just found that really affecting, that people I worked with had all those same feelings of love, and really just had to be much, much more careful and limited in what they could do for their children. So I guess to me, it's hard to imagine. I just like you'd have to just be a total jerk to I don't know, to not understand why. I don't know, it's very easy to look down on the desire for things and stuff when you have plenty of money and it's just a status symbol for you. But I think it's very different when you don't have the money and the stuff is about survival and just basic dignity.
Yeah, it's so true. I worked retail 10 years. I worked at a record store called Kent Mill Records in Maryland and Virginia. And it was almost like living in Narnia in a sense, because the people who came in, you were invisible to them. You were in another reality, another world, and they didn't know what you went through. I mean, I'll give you one example. I worked with a young guy who couldn't afford to go on a honeymoon overseas, so he went to a little hotel by a man-made lake off of I-270 in Maryland. And I think for most people, they would look at that as being not something they would mock, but something they may not understand. But when you're in that world and when you're making, at this time, $6 an hour, and you're wearing shoes from the dollar store and you're eating lunch every day, takeout Chinese, standing up, that becomes a different reality than what the people who are coming in and leaving immediately experience. And that's something that I never forgot. And I think as a writer, it's imperative to know about this sort of thing. I think all writers, or maybe just any young person, it should almost be mandatory to live in a society where if you can order something overnight, almost like the Kennedys started with the Peace Corps, to know what goes on into having that package delivered to you overnight, what it takes for someone to get up at 2:30 in the morning to be able to make
Right.
your life more comfortable.
Right. I couldn't agree more. I think that just even within our lifetimes, that there's been a shift of I think like middle class kids, or perhaps more upper middle class kids, are just less likely to get jobs and more likely to get internships and do this or that that's good for their resumes for college or grad school. And not only is that problematic in other ways, but I also think it's just really problematic in not seeing more of the world and being told over and over again that you're special because you're presumably good at things like the SATs, and that like means you're sort of separate and excluded from the struggles that many other people have. I mean, I find that just so noxious and harmful. I think that sort of the world, I don't know exactly how old you are, we're the same generation, but of like growing up in the 80s and 90s, it's just much more typical to just get jobs during the summer.
Yeah.
And I think that's really valuable and important.
I think so, especially as a writer, to know what it takes to be out there in the real world. And this is something that when I see the GOP specifically talking about certain aspects of that world, for instance, them talking about how people receive food stamps and they're living such an easy life. The fact of the matter is that if you're under the federal food stamp program bureaucracy, that almost becomes like a second job. Oh
my gosh, yeah.
And you really dealt with it well in this novel. Just to have some empathy for people who are living this sort of life, who may not have a car to get food, who may not have certainly the money, who may not have the money to have a babysitter watch after the children, someone who's working from 2:30 until 8:30. They don't have the money or the means to buy groceries, to prepare vegetables, cooking a full meal. And that's something you really nailed in the book.
Oh, thanks. And it's funny, there's one thing that I wanted in the book that meant a lot to me, and it goes to what you're saying about Republicans in particular, but might be more widely applicable. I'm not sure, but there's a character in the book named Ruby, and at a certain point toward the end of the book, she borrows $20 from a coworker because she wants to get a manicure because her son and daughter-in-law are coming to visit. And it's really important for her to present herself to them as successful and the kind of person who could afford a manicure, but she doesn't have the $20. And I would like to think that any reader who has spent like the previous 300 pages with Ruby completely empathizes and really wants her to get her manicure, because we've seen that she works very hard. She's been working her whole life. She's got so little to show for it. She's 30 years experience doing these service jobs, and she's still barely getting by, doesn't have a car. And I want the reader to feel like, of course she deserves a manicure. And my larger point is that it's just very easy to never have been poor and to hear something about like something that a poor person is supposedly spending money on and just be very judgmental toward it. And I didn't want to, in any way sugarcoat the larger struggles. Most of the character struggles involve car payments and rent and food. But also in that context, I hope a reader empathizes of like, right, this person deserves to be able to get a manicure on occasion. That people are entitled to small forms of dignity and reward, as well as the basics of food, housing, etc.
Well, that's just it. Which I don't understand with the GOP in a lot of ways. I mean, do you not know what it's like to maybe need help? Have you never not needed help? And if you did, have you forgotten what it's like? I mean, all of us at some point need some sort of helping hand. And if you're walking by the side of the road at 2:30 in the morning because you can't afford a car to go to your job to work at $15 an hour, I see certainly nothing wrong with making their lives a little bit easier, because what they're doing is making our lives a little bit easier. It's just that lack of empathy, which I don't understand.
Right. I mean, I think it also comes from maybe I'm being too generous, but like a false narrative. And my hope is that this narrative can be punctured, because I do think it's not to let people off the hook at all, because I think they've allowed themselves to indulge this false narrative, but this idea that if people work hard and want to do better, that they can. So therefore, the people who are still poor are poorer because they're lazy in some way. And I think, I think this is entirely false, but I think it serves as a justification, certainly self-serving and convenient justification. But, I had hoped in some way for the book to puncture that, to show that how little there is for these characters to do that they're not already doing. And in fact, they probably do more than many of us think we would do in similar circumstances. They really care about the job, not because their employer cares about them, but just because they can't help it. They're there, and it's a store. They want to do things properly. They take pride in it. And I think if we think about it rationally, that's much more representative of the actual lives or disposition of American workers, like this idea in the culture, or in certain ungenerous parts of the culture, that American workers are just lazy and that's why they're not doing well. It's just so belied by the fact that, every time, middle class people say we have to get to the airport very early in the morning, there's always an Uber driver who wants to take us, and then there's someone working at the Dunkin' Donuts at the airport to make us our coffee and our egg sandwich. And, just think of the services that we all get. We pay so little for, and someone is there. They're waking up early. They're getting there. They're going through airport security to work in the Dunkin' Donuts at the terminal. It should be obvious how hard people are working and for how little. But I think for some people, it's just not. They really cling to the narrative of this is the land of opportunity, and if someone's not doing well, it must be because of some flaw on their part.
Right. It's such mythology. It's such a Reagan-oriented, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I mean, it really does remind me of H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, where the main character lands in a future and it's heaven, it's paradise above, but below you have workers working in hellish conditions. And you really do see that out there.
No, I'm so with you. And I think that, again, not to be too polemical or on my own hot bee horse in this, but I think the extent to which we've moved in that direction just within our lifetimes, I think has been a little bit camouflaged by for people who are doing okay. For those of us with our college degrees and our knowledge economy jobs, I think in recent years, maybe we've felt more insecurity with rising housing prices, rising cost of education. But I think there's this transformation happening, and we were kind of spared some of the ill effects, and even had our vanity flattered of like, oh, it's fine. It's our skills are valued because we're part of the knowledge economy. It just other people have to readjust. And I just think in the course, over a generation or two, just life just got a lot worse for a lot of people. It was once more standard to pay a living wage rather than these poverty level wages combined with meager government assistance that requires people to go to, jump through all sorts of hoops to get it. And this isn't the way we have organized our society in the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Yeah, it's a losing game. I mean, we're playing under casino rules and we're just not going to win. I mean, when you see someone like Jeff Bezos buy $1 billion yacht and then refuse to allow his deliverers take a bathroom break, something is wrong. It's just not
right.
It's not going to get better either. It's going to get worse. And I think we're really in trouble.
I tend to agree. And I think my favorite anecdote these days is where I live in the Hudson Valley. There's a lot of there were mansions from like the Gilded Age era, like the Vanderbilts, the Roosevelts, various other tycoons built their mansions along the Hudson River up here. And for a while in the 20th century, these mansions sort of fell into states of disrepair. They were donated to the state, turned into museums or parks and walking paths, because during much of the 20th century, they were just seen as too expensive to maintain for a private family. We saw them as a reflection of a gilded age with these robber barons. But now it's like that age has returned with a vengeance. I think one of the founders of Google apparently has bought 3 estates on the Hudson River next to each other, not just one large estate, 3, and then is building a train to connect his 3 large estates.
God. Wow.
And it's like, what? Like we thought we were out of the Gilded Age, and the idea that sort of quietly this is happening, where I feel like we're returning to something that's even more extreme.
Total denial. I mean, when you hear about a billionaire owning an entire Hawaiian island, or basically the entire island, I mean, how's that to the benefit of anyone? And to encourage this type of commerce, capitalism, and then to be framed as being a communist or a socialist if you disagree with it, it's really dangerous.
I know. I completely agree, and I think there is another model. I always go back to. Are you a fan of the movie It's a Wonderful Life?
Oh, I love it.
Okay, me too. I mean, and to me, I just feel like it's like the vision of Bedford Falls versus Pottersville. Pottersville being the dystopia, this dystopian future when the whole town is run by Mr. Potter, the banker, versus Bedford Falls, a vibrant town with a middle class population of different types of businesses operating on Main Street. And I think these 2 models are available, and there is a way to do capitalism that's not perfect, but that's much more Bedford Falls like. But we are on the Pottersville route, unfortunately.
Right. Well, listen, when Mr. Potter is not was the president and could once again become the president, how is that going to work out for anyone?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's like the Back to the Future, the second one, where Biff takes over the town. It turns into a shithole.
Right.
Americans are very visceral people, and I think through books, movies, and TV shows is really the best way to get this through, not necessarily through 10,000-word articles in the New York Review of Books. I mean, I'm just using my own family as an example. I don't know how many articles in the New Yorker would at this point convince the conservatives in my family to switch gears. But I think it's books like yours that are going to make a difference. And just really impressed by it. And the book is called Help Wanted. It came out March 5th through W.W. Norton. It was such an interesting thing, too, to reread The Love Affairs of Nathaniel P., which came out in 2013 from Henry Holt. It just seemed like such an innocent time. And I lived in New York during that time, too. It just seems so much darker now. And I think you really nailed the zeitgeist with this new book. So thank you for writing it. And thank you for being on here. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was really wonderful. I appreciate it.
So I met the comedy writer Evan Waite about, 15 years ago or so. Really interesting guy. He was coming to comedy writing from having been a teacher of English as a second language, and he was coming to it, I guess, in his early 30s. So what struck me immediately is, 1, just how nice he was, and 2, just how hard he was willing to work and how eager he was to learn the craft of writing. There was never any pomposity or ego on his part, just an openness to reach out and to learn from those who were writing comedy. What also struck me was just how talented he was, producing a ton of material consistently. So that was 15 years ago, and now when you look at his CV, we're talking The Onion, The President's Show, The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, Sunnyside, Fairfax, and now the executive producer of The Family Guy. I guess that's what talent and hard work and being nice does for you. Evan has also contributed often to The New Yorker, McSweeney's, and other sites and publications, and he has a new book coming out April 16th from Chronicle Books that I highly recommend. It's called Life Wants You Dead, a calm, rational, and totally legit guide to scaring yourself safe. I've never interviewed Evan before, so this is really fun. Here is my interview now with my pal, Evan Waite. You have a very interesting background, a very interesting history when it comes into how you got into comedy and how you ended up. Can you talk a little bit about how you first started your career and how you got to where you are now?
before I got into comedy, I used to be an English as a second language teacher at elementary schools. So, when I went to college, that's what I was doing. Then I was working as a teacher in New Jersey for 2 years. And then after that, I ended up going to this job fair that I would go work overseas. And so I worked in China for a couple of years at international schools. And so I was doing that and I was enjoying myself and the job was good and everything. But at a certain point, I started to think about whether I should stay and do this forever or if there was something else that I wanted to do. So it was sort of a fork in the road moment. And I decided that I, wanted to take a shot at writing for The Onion. And so at the job, you have to leave, or you have to tell them you're leaving in December, but you don't actually have to, the school year doesn't end until June. So there was like a 7-month window where I could know that I was leaving, but I could still prepare. And so I was just writing a ton of headlines for The Onion and putting them on Facebook and trying to see if I could attract any attention and get in touch with somebody who was over there, because The Onion at the time was a very closed off system. So you didn't really know how to get into it very, very easily. There was no clear pathway. A couple of lucky breaks, I got in touch with one of the editors there and he gave me a shot to do a tryout for The Onion. So essentially, you would have to pitch headlines for 4 weeks. And if you get anything in, then they let you stick around. And I was able to pass it. And because of that, they let me stick around there. And, all of a sudden I was in New York trying to, make my way, but I really didn't know anybody or anything. I was just like trying to take it all in. And so I would say that was my first like foothold into comedy.
Now, what year was this?
This was 2011.
Okay, so when you say that it was hard to get into The Onion, you're not kidding. It was extremely closed off. It was not something you could just show up and apply for. And you just told me that you got some lucky breaks. What were those lucky breaks?
Well, it wasn't total luck. I had a strategy. When I was thinking about it, I thought, okay, I want to get in touch with people in The Onion, but I don't want to send an email to the editor-in-chief and say, hey, I'd like to be in The Onion. Because I just assumed he probably gets hit with like 5 of those a day and it would just be annoying and you would just immediately burn your bridge. So the strategy I conceived was kind of like a concentric circles idea where you start by talking to people who are in the orbit of The Onion, like people who used to work there but didn't work there anymore, because it felt like they would be able to be a little more candid about how to do it, because they wouldn't be like representing the company in the same way. Try to start to meet the people a little closer and closer until you're actually talking to the people who still work there. So that was kind of my philosophy going in, was that if you pitch a bunch of stuff and then, when you try to become friendly with like the editor, they see that you're friends with other people that they know. So it gives you some sort of validation in some way. You know what I mean?
That's a very savvy way to do it. I mean, that's what I noticed with you at the very beginning, is just how smart you were going about it. You seem to know how to do what you needed to do and to avoid what you didn't need to do. I recommend that to anyone out there, is to, first of all, be nice. Don't be an asshole, which you certainly were not. And to sort of work your way in just by meeting people and networking. That's really how one gets into comedy. It's really, in the end, how talented you are, but also who you know and their willingness to work with you.
Yeah, I'd say like most of the jobs I've gotten, have been people that you were just in touch with, and people that were friendly with you, and then they sort of rise, and then they bring you along, and then something happens for you, and you can bring them along. And it's, I never bought into this idea of this zero-sum game where like somebody else's gain is your loss. I think that's a very terrible way to think about it. And it also robs you of the joy of any kind of accomplishments you have or your friends have. It's just like a bummer for everybody involved.
Right. Or their loss is my gain. I mean, to look at it as a competition, I think, is a big mistake, because really, in the end, you have to come up together. It has to be through people you know and get along with. And that is something I didn't know at first. I looked at it as being very much a competitive sport. And I really wish I had known that it was just the opposite from the get-go. would have made my life a lot easier.
Yeah. Plus, it's, this is supposed to be fun, like, let's not lose that part of it because you're so wrapped up in the competition of it. It's like, there's nothing fun about that. Like hanging out with your friends and making cool stuff. Like, that's why I want to do this.
So in 2011, your laser focus was to get into The Onion. I'm wondering if that would mean the same thing these days, that if you were starting off, what would you focus on? It's almost so scattered now. I'm not even sure where one would start.
Honestly, the thing that I see is sort of, I don't know if you know Z-Way, but she kind of is a woman who built her own ecosystem of material. And then when that became popular, like, then she gets to pick where she wants to put it. She did a show on Showtime for a couple seasons, and she started out just doing her own web videos and building her own brand independently. And then it became really popular, particularly around the time of the pandemic. She just like sort of blew up. She was doing all these interesting interviews with all these people. And then all of a sudden she's super successful on her own. And then the networks come sort of clamoring for her, and then she can sort of have her pick of where she wants to put it.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like shifting leverage so that you have the clout and then they need it, as opposed to going there with your hat in hands.
Well, that's extremely intelligent. The problem is there's so much out there now. How does one rise above the rest to be noticed?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard. She happens to be extremely talented and charismatic, and, that she's really understood what she was doing. And that's hard to figure out. But, she also was in the trenches for years working on other things first. It wasn't just that. She was over at The Onion, and then Jesus and Miro and The Rundown with Robin Thede. So, she was able to get in the mix in other ways too. So, I mean, it is tricky. The landscape is very different. I'm not 100% sure how I would approach it now. It was a lot clearer to me then, but things are shifting at a very fast rate right now.
Yeah, it is a different world than certainly what I started with, and also what I was dealing with 10 years ago. And when people ask me now how to make it and to do what they want, I am always sort of a little puzzled on where to send them. But my first bit of advice is, tell me exactly what you want to do. Do you want to write for the New Yorker? Do you want to write books? Do you want to write TV? You want to write late night? Do you want to write sitcoms? I think the days of writing for the New Yorker, and I got into it for this reason. I always thought that if I was in the New Yorker, I would be in the major leagues, and then people would reach out and ask me to write for television and write books and other things. I'm not so sure that works anymore. I think what one should do, and this is what I recommend, is to be very honest with yourself. Say to yourself, or ask yourself, what do I want to do? What would be the dream of mine? And then to go after that specific dream, because life is short and there's only so much time one has to do it. And I think that the sooner one is honest with themselves about what they want specifically to do the most, the easier it will be for them.
Yeah. I think honestly, like, if you're going to pursue something, like, I'd rather fail at the thing I'm really wanting than, like, I think it would be a very bad feeling to sort of compromise right out of the gate, and then you're not successful at that. Then it's like, well, what was I even doing? Like, I didn't even take the actual shot that I wanted to. So, I mean, it's a hard business anyway. So you might as well try to really go for the purest version of what you want.
That's right. Yeah.
So do the best work too. I mean, I think you'll do way better work if you're really into what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like The Onion is something I was hailing this all the time. I just loved it so much. So I felt like that was a good place to go because I felt like I really cared about it and it mattered to me.
And then you branched out pretty quickly. So how did you go from writing for The Onion, which was what you wanted to do, to then writing for television? When did that dream of writing for television come about, or had it always been there?
It definitely had not been there. I mean, I didn't see anything past The Onion at all. Like, it didn't even occur to me that I would be able to even do it. It just wasn't on my radar. But when I got to New York and I started doing The Onion, they had these parties, Whiskey Friday every week at the office. So I would just go to that. I was like, yeah, I really need to meet people, because I literally knew one guy in comedy. I was like, this is not sustainable. Like, I don't feel good about that. It feels like real shaky ground, you know? So I was going to the parties every week, and I just started to meet people who'd come through that were in different like New York comedy writing circles. And at one point I met this guy named Ward Sutton, who I'm sure you probably know.
Yeah.
So he does the editorial cartoon at The Onion, and he also does Mad Magazine stuff. And so I just got to talking with him at the party, and I asked him, hey, could I ever pitch to Mad Magazine? You think they would be up for that? And he's like, yeah, probably. And so he connected me with them, and so I started pitching some stuff with those guys. And I would get some pieces in, and then at one point they asked me if I knew any new contributors or new people who might be interested in contributing, because they were trying to like freshen up their contributor base. I think they had a lot of the same people for a long time. And so I was like, absolutely.
A long time. I mean, we're talking 40 years at that point, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's just like they just wanted some new blood in there. And so I was like, yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to do that. And this is where my wheels are spinning. Like, I'm just like, well, I should invite people who I want to be in business with, because then I have something to offer them. I'll say, hey, if you ever want to be in Magazine. So this is a guy at The Daily Show or Colbert Report, or just like places I'd like to one day be in. And so we had this meeting, and so I brought about maybe 5 people or so. And unbeknownst to me, this other guy, Frank Santopadre, they had asked him to do the same thing. And so he brought some of his people, and these were all people from different spaces that I didn't know.
Yeah.
And so I remember at one point we were in this conference room where all these different interesting people were there, and it was just like such an interesting mix of people, and everybody, the conversation was really fertile. And so me and Frank had a cup of coffee after, and we said, maybe we could engineer something like this. And so what we did is we decided to have like a writer's dinner every month, where it would be me and Frank, and then we'd invite like 4 other people from different spaces in New York comedy. And we just break bread and just hang out and talk and stuff. It was never like some spider web of like, hey, I got you here, now what can you do for me? It's just like, let's just meet each other and talk.
Mm-hmm.
So we did that for, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months. And every one of them went great, and they were really fun. And I could tell that the other people were getting a lot out of it too, because everybody was kind of siloed in their own comedy space. And at that point, we were like, maybe we could expand this into like a bigger thing. Like, why don't we do like a full scale, like a party? So instead of like 4 people, it could be like 50 people. And so we did that. The first one was very nerve-wracking because, you're like, are people actually going to show up for this? Or we just rented this place to look like a bunch of assholes. But the first one went really well, and you could tell everybody was really into it and having a good time. And what we said was, we were like, don't even bring your spouse. We don't want anybody in this room who's not like one of these folks. We just wanted it to be just as concentrated as possible. And so we did that, and it was just fun and interesting. And just right away, I could feel my network just expanding, and I was just hearing about what was going on more. And it was just like it just felt like the momentum was really good. And so we did that. We did that every 6 months for, I don't know, I think we did like 5 of them. And it was just great. And all of a sudden I just knew what was going on. And then I could help other people. They were helping me. And that's how I found out what was going on in the TV space. Like now, all of a sudden, when a show was hiring, I would know about it like every time.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I could just submit packets, and I was just in that sort of game, trying to get into The Daily Show and Sam B and all those.
Can you explain what a packet is, what you need to do to write a packet, what it entails to produce something like this?
Yeah, well, I mean, every show has its different nuances to it, but essentially, like, for instance, The Daily Show, at the time, you would have to write 3 segments of the show, like, the first act of the show. You'd have to write 2 of those, and then you'd have to write 1 correspondence chat, which is like where the host is talking with one of the correspondents, and there's some bit that they're doing. And it's a ton of work. I mean, it's particularly like shows like The Daily Show and Last Week Tonight. They're very, very hard because, first of all, if you were working on the show, they would give you all the information that you would need, like all the video clips and the background information. But because you're just one person, you have to get all of that. So you're sitting there transcribing like MSNBC and, trying to find all the right clips and meld it into something. It's just like, it's very difficult, and it takes an enormous amount of energy. And particularly for The Daily Show and Sam B at the time, there were 2 rounds. So you'd have to do that first round. And then if you pass that one, then you'd have to go back and do a second round where you'd have, well, for The Daily Show, you'd have to turn it around in 24 hours. They wanted to replicate the speed of the actual show. So it was, you felt very drained afterwards. But for me, like what I tried to do was I tried to get a hold of a real script so that I could see what it actually looks like, down to like even making it like making your packet like the same font and the same colors. And just, psychologically, you want to make it as seamless as possible, that they could feel like they could just slide it directly into the show without any changes or anything.
That is such a savvy move right there. I mean, that is something that I recommend anyone to do. Even applying to New Yorker or submitting to New Yorker, make it look like the finished product. Make it easy for them to see it as the finished product, because it's very easy to look at it quickly and say, even if it's well written, this person doesn't know what he's doing or she's doing.
Mm-hmm. It's just like they're very, very busy, and especially on a daily show or a show that where the pace is very fast. They want to make this as easy as possible for themselves. Like they want somebody who's additive and not somebody who they have to slow down for. And obviously, when you're on a new show, they're going to have to show you the ropes and everything. But like, as seamless as you can make it, makes you just like a more attractive candidate to them, I think.
That's right. Make it easy for them to accept you, and don't make it easy for them to reject you. So this is a lot of work, as you're saying, and you can put in the work for this, and you're not being paid, and nothing can become of it very easily, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, nothing became of most of them. I mean, really, it's just, sometimes you don't even get an email back saying they either got it or that they're even rejecting it. You just sort of see that there's like a new name listed on the credits like a month later, and you're like, oh, I guess that's the job I was applying for. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty thankless, but honestly, it does make you a lot better, so that you're getting, like, each time you do this, you are getting better and faster. And so there is that benefit to it. You don't maybe feel it at the time, but once you finally do break through, you're like, oh, all those other packets you did actually did help you, prepare you for what it would actually be like when you had to do the job.
Okay. So how many, do you remember who you applied to, what shows you're applying to?
See, I applied to Daily Show, I think 3 times, Sam B twice, Last Week Tonight. There was James Corden, Jimmy Kimmel, Nikki Glazer, Jesus Amira. Like, I would say probably I've done at least like 25 of them or so.
25 of them. So we're talking, these are week-long projects, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Tremendous. So the amount of work
to do it the way you have to do it, like to do it the way you need to like have any chance of getting it. Yeah.
And did you hear back from, how many did you hear back from?
I'd say probably 2/3 of the time I would hear back. And, I got into the final round of The Daily Show one time. Sam B, I've been like getting close a couple of times. So I felt like, I was in the range of possibility. When you get into the second round, you're like among a few candidates, so you're not far off. But in some ways that can be even more crushing when you don't get it, because you're starting to, now your wheels are spinning in your fantasies of like, getting onto it because you feel like you're close to it. But
yeah, I just don't know if people realize how difficult this is. I mean, you dream about writing comedy as a kid. You don't dream about writing 25 packets, which takes up to 40 hours each packet. Tremendous amount of work, especially to break in. And the fact that you put in that time and that effort without ever stopping is really impressive.
Well, it's just, it always felt like things were going in the right direction, even though, I wasn't getting a job I wanted yet. I was always like, things are heading in the way they should be. So I felt like, if I just have patience and try to stay the course, like ultimately, I'll be able to break through.
Well, it
Just
sounds
felt
like you were all in. I mean, there was no going back to teaching, right? And this is what you wanted to do. And you took a chance because the margin of error is thin. If it doesn't work out, you're kind of screwed. But this is really, you have to put your whole effort, your whole being into this sort of thing.
Oh, definitely. I really felt like, having the thing with the Onion sort of happen really gave me a lot of confidence. I was like, okay, like there's a way to figure this out. Like, it just gave me the validation that like I'm not like insane to think that I could ever do it.
Well,
So
one thing that really impressed me was I was involved with the Humber College. They were giving a symposium, a seminar one weekend years and years ago, maybe 10 years ago. And, we were friends and you showed up. You were nice enough to show up. And you were in the audience throughout when these comedy writers were talking, and you were taking notes. And you were the only person I saw doing that. And it really impressed me. I thought, this guy's not fucking around. And he is in here on a weekend and he's choosing to be here. Not only choosing to be here, but he is not just here to shake hands and glad hand. He is here to actually learn from these people. Do you remember doing that?
I do. Yeah. Yeah. It's, I felt like I wanted to do this so much. And then all of a sudden I have access to people who are doing it. And it's just like, it's just being handed to me on a silver platter. It's just like, why wouldn't I do that? And it was so, I'm just into it. I like doing it. It's not like, I'm not doing this to, get rich. I mean, obviously I want to make money and stuff, but like, that was never the driver. It's like, I really just enjoy doing this and it's just fun. And I'm just like, this is what could be a better job than doing this kind of thing. So I felt like I had access to some of the best comedy writers around. I was like, why wouldn't I take full advantage of that?
So how'd you make that leap between writing all of these packets, and when did you finally get that first job in television?
Well, I had been kind of knocking at the door in New York, and I felt like, okay, I was getting close, but like, it's just not happening. So, I was like, you know what, I'm going to try my luck out in LA. So I moved to LA back in, I think 2016 or 2017, maybe. And I, then like, after I got there, I'd only been there for a couple of weeks. And then I got a packet for the President's Show. And I was like, as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, this seems very enticing to me, because I was like, the sensibility of the show just really aligned. I mean, the sensibility of Anthony, who was the host of the show, really aligned with what I like to do. And I was like, oh, I think I could really be good at this.
Anthony who?
And Anthony Atamanik, who was the host of the President's Show. For those of you who may not know, like the President's Show, the conceit of it was that Donald Trump is hosting a talk show from the White House. He was like in the Oval Office doing a talk show. And I was like, oh, there's some real like opportunities for some really interesting satire there. And I was like, it's like sort of my synapses from the Onion started to fire. And so I ended up just really grinding on this packet. And it was just, I felt like everything was flowing really well. And, I really went all out on this one. I had I did like Photoshops and all these different things that I put into the packet. And it really was like a full scale packet, like probably more intense than any one I had done before that, because I really wanted that job. And so I turned it in, and I heard from them pretty quickly after. It was only a few days later. They said they wanted to have an interview, and I was like, fantastic. And when we had the interview, everything was just like working so well. I mean, it just like the connection was like instant. I was just like, right after I got on the phone, I was like, I think I got that one. And I did. So then I had to move back to New York right after. So I moved like across the country twice in the span of 2 months.
Yeah.
It was not like the ideal way to do it, but the job was just like perfect fit for me. I really took to it very quickly.
You wanted to write for TV, and it happens. Was it what you had envisioned?
Honestly, it was even better. I mean, it was the most fun job to this day that I've ever had. It was just like fantastic, because everybody was so collaborative. It didn't feel competitive in any way. It felt like a real team. Like everybody, I think maybe because Anthony, the host, he was from the UCB space where, everybody works together to make something. So that was like the ethos of the show right out of the gate. And also everybody was so much more accomplished than I was, and they all like knew the lay of the land. They had been on several shows. And so I felt like immediately I was in like college or something. I was in like this comedy college where I was just learning from these really, really talented people. And they were all really willing to share their information and talk to me about how to do this. And they felt like they all wanted me to win, and I wanted them to win. We all just were at each other's backs so deeply. And so, I was nervous coming in, but like by the end of the week, I was like, oh, I could do this for sure. Like it felt very, very solid. So I'm lucky that I happened to land. My first show happened to be a show like that. Not all shows are.
Yeah. So this was the job that everyone dreams about, and your first job, you nail it. You get what you wanted.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And, I was very hungry to prove myself too, because I was like the low man on the totem pole, and they had really taken a big chance on me. I was like, I want to make sure that I'm like delivering for them, and that I'm, so I was really, really, really intense. And one other thing, I tried to find little pockets where I could help out in ways that they weren't asking me to. Like, obviously you can just do a job, they tell you to do it and you do it. But I was like, well, where can I be helpful? And so I kind of zeroed in on our Twitter feed, which was kind of a graveyard. I mean, they would really just post, hey, that the show's airing tonight at 8:30. And that's all it was. And so I went to the boss and I said, maybe I could like pitch more jokes and stuff. Like, let's make this into something, make it a little more vibrant. And they were like, all right, if you want, go ahead. And so I just started writing a bunch of jokes for that, and just tried to build that side of it up, because it felt like this is like added value that they weren't like asking you to do. I think that's very helpful.
All right. So when you were on the inside, did you see people applying for the show who were doing it wrong? And what were they doing that was wrong? How were they going about it that was not getting them the job?
Well, honestly, I wasn't even really privy to that stuff. We were only on for one season, and there were a few hirings, but I don't really know how they happen. It's just like somebody would just be there one day. It was a new person. But I will say in general, things that can cause you problems with packets and trying to apply to the shows is not knowing the voice of the show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like just pitching jokes that are funny, but they're not anything that the characters in the show would say if it goes against it. Like if you're pitching, a packet for Jimmy Fallon and you put a bunch of really blue material in there, it may be really funny, but like he's not going to use it. So it's not helpful to them. Yeah. So I think not matching voice, like I think the ideal sort of synthesis is like, it's almost like a Venn diagram of your voice and the show's voice. And if you can hit that middle sweet spot, so you're bringing something new, but also it still fits into the container that they have, like then you're really adding something. Because it doesn't want to just be derivative and feel like it's just they've already done it, but it should be something that is usable.
That's a very common mistake I've seen in print, and I can imagine in TV. You'll receive these submissions that aren't right for what you're looking for.
Part of that is like the ego of like having a great joke, and you just like you just want it so much that you'll just like ram it into something where it doesn't really belong. And I think, my training with The Onion really helped me to get out of that, because The Onion's like, yeah, this could be the greatest joke in the world, but if it derails the logic of the piece, it has to be gone immediately without a second thought.
Right. And so never to be seen again. Right.
Yeah, just throw it away, get rid of it. And so it sort of it taught me to be less precious about that stuff.
You have to be less precious. So you're on for 1 year and it's canceled.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're now without a job again. So what did you do at that point?
Something amazing happened at that time, which is that my name got passed around to the Kimmy Schmidt people, which was, Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt was Tina Fey and Robert Carlock's show After 30 Rock. And so they were really fans of The President Show. I didn't know this at the time. But they were friends of the President Show, and they knew one of the executive producers of the President Show. And so they kind of were sniffing around just to see who was over there. And apparently my name got sort of passed over to them. And so one day I just got an email asking if I wanted to meet them. I was like, of course, absolutely. Like, That was just like the most insane email I've ever received. But I was like, sure, I would be happy to do that. And I didn't think that anything was ever going to happen, but they did actually end up hiring me as a staff writer on the show. And so it actually started the Monday after the president ended.
Oh, wow. Perfect.
So it was basically just like on Friday, I'm on the president show, and on Monday, I was like Kimmy Schmidt.
Incredible.
It was just absolute bananas.
And what was that experience like? Because that is a show that a lot of people, including myself, were just huge fans of.
Yeah, I mean, that I was terrified because like the level jump that of like all of a sudden where I'm at in this room. I remember like the first day I was sitting next to Tina, like trying to pitch jokes and stuff. I'm like, my head is like spinning, and it really threw me off in the beginning. I was just like, I should just shut the fuck up because like these are the real comedy writers. I'm just like an amateur hour guy. And so it took me a little bit of time to kind of just get the confidence to just be myself. Because once I could do that, then I could really be a part of this. But I was like gun shy in the beginning because the pace was so fast and everybody in the room was so funny. So being comfortable really helps. And they were nothing but nice to me. It was just my own like insecurities just like coming to the surface so quickly.
So what was that room like with her leading it? I mean, was it intimidating, or was it an open atmosphere where she was accepting of jokes, even if they weren't great? She would just be an open mind for anything that might work.
I mean, everybody was very open. I mean, she was great. This was the season that she was doing Mean Girls, the musical. So she was kind of in and out of the room. She was there like a couple of days a week, but she had a Broadway show that was like about to open. So she was kind of tending to that somewhat too. So I would say like Robert Carlock was the guy like running the day to day, like as she was out. But everybody was great. Like it was just like a really nice group of people. And, you know, Tina has like a no assholes policy. She's just like, I don't care how talented you are. If you're an asshole, like I just don't want you here because you're going to like mess up the vibe. So everybody was cool and really, really nice and very welcoming to me as a guy who, you know, it's just like figuring out what I was doing.
What was your job? Was it just to pitch jokes, or when did you have to write your first episode?
I got to write an episode with Meredith Scardino. We co-wrote one episode late in the season. It was like the 10th or 11th episode. And I wasn't sure that I was going to even get one. I was like, I hope I will, but like I'm in no position to be expecting anything. So it was like a nice surprise. And Meredith is like one of the funniest people on the planet. So I was like, just writing with her, I know it's going to be good.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but you know, I was just pitching a ton of jokes, and it's just such a joke heavy show that you're just like feeding it into the machine.
And you were there for how long?
I was only there for one season because the show, that was the last season of the show.
Right.
So that ended. I was hoping that I would be able to, hoping that I would be able to stick around longer. This was a real education in the TV writing atmosphere, because I assumed that the show would just keep going as long as they wanted to do it. Because it's like, oh, it's Tina. It's, you know, how could this ever be ending? You know, but it was, that was just the last season. Like Netflix, I think the more seasons the show goes, the more expensive it gets. So that's why they tend to cut it off after like 3 or 4 seasons sometimes.
Right. And then, so from there you went to where?
After that, I did like a little like 6-week thing on Our Cartoon President, which was like a Showtime show at the time. And then I went to do this Michael Moore. It was a reboot of this old show, TV Nation, that he did.
Mm-hmm.
And that ended up not getting on the air, but I was on there for a couple of months. And after that, that's when I realized that, like, you know, I feel like I sort of hit my ceiling in New York. I'm like, I'm never going to get a better job than Kimmy Schmidt in New York. Like, and I wanted to stay in narrative. So that's the period where I decided that I was probably trying to go west. And then I started on this show called Fairfax, which is a Netflix animated show at the time. And that's the show that kind of brought me back to Los Angeles.
Do you have to do packets anymore, or does your agent just contact you and set up a meeting?
It's not so much packets anymore. It's more or less just like your pilot and your scripts, because if I was going back into late night, I would have to do packets again, probably, or I mean, maybe not. I'm not sure, but I kind of I don't really. I'm just not into late night right now. I mean, obviously the political landscape is just an absolute nightmare, and it just seems like a real drag.
And what are you doing right now as far as TV?
I am on Family Guy. This is my 4th season on the show. So I've been here for a couple of years, and it's just been really fun. I mean, I'm a joke writer at heart, and this is a show where you can just do the range of jokes you can do is just so wide, and that's like the currency of the show. So I'm just really having a good time doing that.
And so that's a show that's been around forever and probably will be around forever. So that's a great gig to have.
Yeah, this is the first show I've ever been on that didn't get canceled, basically. Where I knew that when the season ended, there would be another one.
All right. So now let's talk about your new book. It's called Life Wants You Dead, a calm, rational, and totally legit guide to scaring yourself safe. It is extremely difficult these days to get a humor book published. Most agents aren't even looking for humor books. If you do pitch a humor book, they'll say they're looking for YA because it's an easier sell. I always recommend to writers to do what I do and self-published humor books, because it's very difficult to get an agent and then a publisher. And if it does come out, it'll come out in 2 to 3 years. So talk about this book, Life Wants You Dead. How did it come to fruition? What did you have to do to get an agent to represent it? And then what was it like to get a publisher to put it out?
Mm-hmm. Well, basically, like, I'll just run you through the conceit of the actual book itself. So Life Wants You Dead is like a comedic survival guide that believes the only way to stay safe is by being afraid of literally everything at all times. So it's like, if you can jack up your level of fear, then you will become safer for it. So it's just had a lot of illustrations and life-saving advice to keep you freaked out, essentially. And so the conceit of this came to me during the pandemic, which is a time when everybody's relationship with fear just completely changed. I'd always thought of myself as a pretty level-headed person, but during the pandemic, like, my anxiety just completely spiked, and I felt insane all of a sudden. And when I looked around, I realized that this was happening to everybody. Like, everybody's relationship to fear had been changing at a very rapid pace. And so I thought, that seems interesting. So I thought, I wanted to start the book from an emotional place. I thought, okay, what's the emotion going on in the world right now? It's clearly is fear. So after coming up with that, I thought, okay, so now I just need like a container to be able to talk about fear. And so I went to Barnes & Noble, and I was just walking around looking at the different kinds of books, and I stumbled into a section that had survival guides. And I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. Like, I was flipping through, and it was already so heightened. Like, the writers of these books they just assume everything is going to go to shit. This is like, when the apocalypse happens, this is what you need to do. It's not even like a question of if it's going to happen. So I thought, like, that's a funny attitude. It's so heightened already. And I'm like, if you could marry that sort of attitude with like a narrator character who just is very confused and doesn't really understand how the world works, I was like, if you put those two things together, that seems like there's a funny engine for comedy there. When I was doing this, I knew that I wanted it to have a real big visual component to it. So I knew that the proposal had to have that too, because I don't want it to be like a Word document where I'm describing what it would look like. I thought, like, let's make it actually look as close to what you want it to be as possible. So to do that, I reached out to my friends at The Onion, and I was like, hey, I know these are graphics people that you have that are really good and also know how to like make the joke work. And so they connected me with some people over there. And so I was talking to some of them, and I got in touch with this one woman named Paula Searing, who does stuff with ClickHole. And right away, I was like, oh, she seems great. Like, this stuff is really funny, and she knows how to do this. And so me and her worked on the proposal together. And, so I kicked her some money to just help me out. And so we were able to actually put it together and make it packed with visuals, and the actual document looked cool, and it had a cover that we made.
Wow. So all this is for the pitch.
Yeah, this is for the pitch.
Very smart.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes publishers and agents can't conceive in their mind what you're conceiving. And to make it easy for them, which is the theme of this, make it easy for them to buy something, you want to make it look like as close to how it's going to look published as possible.
Just describing it is one thing, but like when you can see it and feel that you're like immersed in it, you just sort of get into the spirit of it in a different way. At least that's my strategy for it. And I think that, obviously it takes, a little bit of investment. You're putting some money up and you hope that it's going to pay off, but you're just trying to present it the most realized version of it. Because I know they get a lot of these proposals all the time. And I would assume that probably a lot of them look pretty similar and maybe they aren't really fun to look at, because I wanted the book to be fun to look at. And so the proposals should also have that same energy, I think.
Right. Very smart. So you did this and you submitted it to the agent, and then she took it to various publishers?
Well, me and the book agent, we kind of worked it over. I gave them my version of the proposal and they had some notes, and, they were really like very thorough and tightened it up with me and helped me just trim the fat and, get rid of stuff that wasn't working and highlight stuff that was. And so we worked on it for another couple of months after that. And then when we all felt like it was in a good place and felt like it was the best version of it, then that's when we took it to the different publishers.
All right. So how many did you take? How many publishers looked at this?
I think it was probably about 15 to 20 publishers.
Wow. And what was the reaction? How many did you hear back from in a positive way?
I'd say we heard back from like 3 or 4, that expressed some interest in it, that were, wanted to talk and stuff. But Chronicle, they were the only ones who actually made the offer. Wow. And so, we winnowed this down. All this work just got down to like one person who got it.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah. And one person.
Luckily, it was like just the right. It was just the right place though, because Chronicle their books are just beautiful. Like the production side of what they do is just so fantastic. And so I think maybe that's something that they saw about what I wanted to do, and there was some overlap there.
Okay, when was this?
So this was in 2021. I started the proposal in 2020. And 2021 is when we sold it.
So we're talking about 3 years later. It's now going to be published. April, was it 16th?
Yep, April 16th, yeah.
Yeah, that's the problem with mainstream publishing. It just takes 3 years. But I will say this, the beauty of this book and the way it feels and the way it looks is just immaculate. It's just perfect. And a lot of times the design when it comes to comedy is overdone, is too wacky. In this specific case, I think it's done perfectly.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I'm really proud of it. I feel like the production side of it was just so strong. And, it took, some calibration of how to figure out what just felt good, but didn't get in the way. And then, when I actually got the final copy, I was just like thrilled. I mean, it just like feels good in your hands. And it just, I'm really happy with how it turned out.
Well, I mean,
really good.
Yeah. You don't see many books like this anymore. And when I got it, I was like, all right, this is sort of a throwback, because the pure comedy books that I grew up loving just aren't being done. Either they're cheapies or they're tethered to current events, or they're, collections of this or collections of that. But a book that's just a pure comedy experience is rare. And I was impressed by the fact that you just got this done. And got it out there the way that you wanted it to look. It's a rare happenstance.
Oh, I mean, I know, because like those are my favorite types of books, and I was sort of starved for those because I just really enjoy the ones that are just like hard comedy, just jokes packed with it, and those are hard sell. And I realized that I had to do everything I possibly could to make it strong enough that they would go for that and overcome that. And actually put money into really doing it properly, because, if you don't go all the way with it, it just sort of falls apart. Like that's one thing I learned from The Onion is that like the form of it is just as important as the material that's in it. Like if it doesn't look right and it's not parroting it properly, then it's just not as good.
I just want to say that I saw you when you're first starting out, and I see where you are now, and you did everything right. Just very impressive to see that. It takes an incredible amount of work, incredible amount of talent, but it can be done, and I think you're proof of that. The book is called Life Wants You Dead, a calm, rational, and totally legit guide to scaring yourself safe. by the great Evan Waite. Evan, nice talking to you. Thanks for giving me your time, and good luck with the book. And when you're in New York, let me get you a drink.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate it, Mike. You've always been a very big supporter of me. I don't take that for granted. So thanks so much, man.
Of course, man. Anytime. Thank you so much. And thanks for being here. That's it for this episode of Doing It with Mike Sachs. I'd like to thank you for listening. I sincerely appreciate it. I'd like to thank Sonar for giving me this opportunity, and I'd like to thank the following for helping me to make this episode possible. Rob Schulte, the world's greatest producer, and that ain't no lie. Adelle Waldman, whose new book, Help Wanted, is out now from W.W. Norton. Highly recommended. Buy it, read it, love it, live it. Evan Waite, comedy writer extraordinaire. His new book is hilarious. Life Wants You Dead, a calm, rational, and totally legit guide to scaring yourself safe. It's out now from Chronicle Books. Now, if I could just give myself a tiny plug here. My first book, a 2009 book of interviews with comedy writers. It was called And Here's the Kicker. It's being re-released later this month with a ton of new material. Came out in 2009, and I'm reprinting, re-releasing it now. It's available anywhere from Open Road Media. We're talking interviews with Al Jaffe of Mad Magazine, Bob Odenkirk, Dick Cavett, Meryl Marco, Allison Silverman, Buck Henry, advice from late night writers, advice from agents. It's all in there. Check it out. I think you might like it. It's called And Here's the Kicker. So, until next episode, keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for my junk, Jack.
People, there is no UFO landing.
Harriet Frankovich thinks there is.
Nobody sees the world the way Harriet does.
What color was I when I was born?
You were kind of red.
You were throwing a tantrum. Well, maybe I didn't want to come out because I knew you were already here.
Until she discovers a friend.
You have California plates. You from Disneyland?
My mom says I'm from a place where I'm the smartest person there.
Ready to share an adventure.
What are we waiting for?
For someone to rescue me.
I want him to rescue me too.
Stay away from the highway.
We will.
We will.
But while they're facing their fears...
Don't look down! Don't look down! Whoa! Are you stuck?
I'm stuck.
Her sister's getting worried.
Promise me you won't hang around Ricky anymore.
Mom, you're driving on the wrong side of the road again.
Buckle up.
And her mother doesn't get it.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Do you think I will switch to another baby at the hospital? Just hoping.
Moonstone Entertainment presents...
My mom is afraid of me being alone when she dies. I don't want to go to a home.
Two extraordinary friends.
Sometimes great ideas came to me all at once.
Trying to escape.
Ricky, I'm flying.
You're not going anywhere. You're still on the rock.
A world that didn't understand them.
You're supposed to kiss me.
I don't want to. I'm not supposed to kiss girls.
Mwah!
I don't want him here. He's a man. He's a grown-up. He's retarded.
Get out of my sight! Ricky, he doesn't know anything about what you're worried about.
Kevin Bacon.
Are we still friends?
Secret friends.
Mary Stuart Masterson. Kathy Moriarty. And introducing Evan Rachel Wood.
I always wish for something magical to happen to me.
In a film by Timothy Hutton.
I'll come back for you! I'm here to see Ricky Schroth.
And you are?
His wife.
Harriet.
About the truth that hurts.
You like me now, but you're gonna grow up. I'm not.
And the friendship that heals.
Have you ever been this happy before?
Digging to China.